A nuclear submarine leaves port before dawn, running on the surface until the water is deep enough. Ballast tanks flood, the bow tilts down, and 7,000 tons of steel disappears into the ocean. The crew seals the hatches from inside. No windows, no GPS signal, no outside contact in most operational postures. 130 men locked inside a steel tube the length of a city block, and they will not see sunlight for 90 days. Most people assume the hard part is the mission, the navigation, the silence, the enemy, but the hardest engineering problem on a submarine is not the weapon. It is keeping human biology alive inside a machine never designed around humans at all. The submarine was designed around the weapon first, the reactor second. The crew was inserted into whatever space remained. That single decision shaped almost everything about life below the surface: the food, the sleep, the air, the water, and the solutions the Navy engineered around it are stranger and more counterintuitive than most people have ever been told. Start with food because it is the first thing that surprises people. On departure day, the submarine is packed so densely with provisions that crew members in the torpedo room literally sleep on top of food pallets. Canned goods stacked under bunks, cases of supplies strapped along passageways, fresh produce jammed into every available corner. The submarine carries no capacity for resupply. Whatever is loaded before diving is all there is for the entire patrol. There is no calling ahead, there is no delivery. The hatch closes and the inventory is fixed. Here is the assumption most people carry: military food is bad, institutional, utilitarian, the bare minimum a government is obligated to provide. That assumption is exactly wrong on a submarine. Submarine food is consistently rated the best in the entire United States military, better than surface ships, better than Army forward bases, better than Air Force installations. Not by accident, by deliberate engineering logic. In a sealed steel tube with no sunlight, no outside world, no mail, and no escape, morale is not a comfort measure. It is a mission-critical variable, treated the same way the Navy treats propulsion or navigation. A crew that is psychologically degraded cannot operate weapon systems at the level the mission requires. The quality of the galley is load-bearing infrastructure, the same as the reactor or the sonar array. The culinary specialist, the chef, is one of the most operationally important people on the boat. The food is sequenced strategically. Perishables first, while refrigeration holds. Dairy, fresh vegetables, fruit. Around week 3, those are gone. The crew shifts to frozen stores. By week 6, fresh food has disappeared entirely. Experienced submariners have a name for this moment. They call it the turn. The smell of the boat changes. The texture of the meals changes. Something shifts in the psychological atmosphere of the patrol. The bread smell from the early weeks, that warm, yeasty smell that drifted through the forward compartments, is gone, and the crew feels its absence in a way that is genuinely difficult to explain to anyone who has not been sealed inside a steel hull for 6 weeks with no prospect of anything different arriving. Sleep operates on a completely different logic. The math on a submarine does not work the way most people imagine. A Virginia-class submarine carries a crew of roughly 135. It has approximately 85 bunks. That gap is not a planning oversight or a budget shortfall. It is an intentional engineering decision. The practice is called hot racking. 2 or sometimes 3 sailors share a single bunk on a rotation schedule. One person sleeps while another stands watch. The bunk is never empty for long. Someone is always in it. The dimensions of those bunks are not generous. They are engineered to the minimum necessary clearance, roughly 6 inches wider than a human shoulder. No more, because every inch given to a bunk is an inch taken away from a weapon system. The submarine does not make that trade willingly. The human absorbs it. There is no natural light at depth, no sunrise, no sunset, no visual cue of any kind that time is passing. The biological clock that humans evolved over millions of years becomes completely useless within days. Early submarines experimented with 18-hour operational days, trying to squeeze 3 watch rotations into a non-standard cycle that left crews perpetually disoriented. Modern boats typically run a 6 hours on, 12 hours off rotation. The crew describes losing track of the day of the week within 2 weeks. The date becomes an abstraction. One watch looks exactly like the last. Officers know this and deliberately engineer rigidity into the daily schedule, not to make life interesting, but to do the opposite. A routine that never varies gives the brain something to hold on to when the environment offers no reference points. It is one of the stranger behavioral paradoxes in military operations. Trained officers imposing maximum repetitiveness on purpose because unpredictability at the wrong moment is more destabilizing than boredom. Now here is the twist most people never consider. The crew breathes recycled air. Everyone knows that going in. But most people picture the challenge as running out of oxygen, the supply draining, the crew rationing breaths as the tanks empty. That is not the real problem. Oxygen is actually the easy part. The reactor generates enormous amounts of electricity. That electricity runs an electrolysis system that splits seawater into hydrogen and oxygen. The oxygen goes back into the atmosphere. The hydrogen is vented. Oxygen supply on a nuclear submarine is essentially unlimited for as long as the reactor runs, and the reactor runs for decades without refueling. The real threat is carbon dioxide. The crew exhales carbon dioxide constantly, every hour of every watch, across the full 90 days. It is invisible, it is odorless, and it accumulates steadily inside a sealed hull with no natural ventilation. At elevated concentrations, it does not smell different or look different. It simply begins making the crew slow, confused, unable to think clearly at the watch stations where clear thinking is the entire job, and then unconscious, with no sensory warning that anything has gone wrong. The sub runs carbon dioxide scrubbers, continuously using lithium hydroxide canisters that chemically absorb carbon dioxide from the circulating air. If those canisters are overwhelmed or degrade without detection, the crew does not know until decision-making starts failing. The constant background hum aboard every submarine, that low mechanical sound present in every compartment, every hour, that new crew members stop consciously hearing within days, is not the reactor. It is the atmosphere management system running without pause, around the clock, for the full length of the patrol. This is not theoretical. In 1949, USS Cochino suffered a catastrophic battery explosion and sank in the Norwegian Sea, killing 1 crew member and several Norwegian sailors during the rescue attempt. Soviet submarine history across the Cold War includes documented cases where atmosphere failures, such as carbon dioxide accumulation, oxygen-fed fires, and scrubber system failures, killed crews silently before rescue teams could even locate the vessels. By the 1960s, the engineering of submarine atmosphere control had been reclassified, redesigned, and rebuilt multiple times. Enough boats had been lost to make the problem impossible to treat as an edge case. The modern system, keeping 135 men breathing correctly for 90 days, is one of the most refined and least discussed systems on the boat. Water follows the same pattern, but with a different twist. The reactor produces so much electricity that fresh water is not scarce. Continuous distillation pulls fresh water from seawater around the clock. There is technically enough production capacity for regular showers, regular laundry, and full daily use for the entire crew. The reason water is rationed is not supply, it is noise. When the crew showers, the gray water, the drain runoff, has to be collected, processed, and discharged against sea pressure. That discharge requires opening a valve. The valve creates a mechanical event. Mechanical events produce sound signatures. At certain depths and operational postures, the submarine goes to what is called quiet ship. No showers, minimal flushing, no unnecessary discharge of any kind. Because a passive sonar array positioned miles away does not need to see the submarine. It only needs to hear one identifiable sound at the wrong moment. The behavioral paradox is sharp here. This is the most technologically advanced vessel in human history, running a nuclear reactor, carrying weapons capable of striking targets over 1,000 miles away, navigating without GPS using inertial systems accurate to within hundreds of meters after weeks at depth. And it routinely operates with a crew that has not showered in 4 days. Not as a failure of the system, not as a shortage. Because the commanding officer determined that acoustic silence was worth more than the hygiene of the crew. That calculation is made constantly, quietly, and without hesitation by every submarine commander operating in a contested environment. The machine is immaculate. The crew is not, by doctrine. The psychological layer is where all of this converges. 90 days, no sunlight, no real privacy in a boat where the widest corridor is barely wide enough for 2 people to pass each other. No phone calls in most operational postures. Modern submarines allow limited one-way emails, short messages called familygrams, screened before transmission with no guarantee of reply. The assumption most people make is that isolation is the central psychological threat. It is not. The harder problem is uniformity. Every day looks identical, smells identical, sounds identical, the same hum, the same lighting, the same 90-foot corridor. The same 135 faces at the same watch stations. Early Cold War research documented measurable degradation in submarine crews approaching the end of 90-day patrols, slower reaction times, reduced decision accuracy, elevated interpersonal friction in the final weeks. The Navy restructured duty rotations across the submarine fleet in the 1970s and formalized what became morale doctrine. Deliberately varied meal events, movie screenings scheduled to break the pattern, holiday observances that interrupt the sameness, occasional surfacing in operationally safe zones called Steel Beach, where the crew can stand on the hull in open air and see the sky for an hour. Every submarine carries a library and a rotating video collection. The crew mess is not a cafeteria, it is the social infrastructure of the boat, and its placement, its design, the way it is used. These are operational decisions backed by documented performance research, not amenities someone added as an afterthought. Not every submarine runs 90-day patrols. Fast attack submarines, the hunter-killer boats, run shorter, more varied missions. Ballistic missile submarines, the ones holding nuclear weapons on constant deterrent patrol, are the ones that run the long cycles. Cold War boats were significantly austere than modern Virginia-class and Ohio-class vessels. Women were excluded from U.S. submarines until 2010, and integration required physically redesigning berthing and sanitation spaces, not simply revising policy. The sub also cannot surface on demand. If a crew member develops appendicitis at depth, the commanding officer weighs whether surfacing and revealing the boat's position is operationally acceptable against the medical timeline. That is a documented command decision that has been made more than once in the history of the submarine force. Here is what it all adds up to. The submarine is not a weapons system with humans squeezed into leftover space. It is a closed-loop life support system engineered specifically to keep a weapons crew functional. The galley, the scrubbers, the bunk rotation, the noise discipline, the morale protocols, none of that is soft infrastructure. It is all load-bearing. The mission requirement at the end of 90 days is not that the crew survived. It is that the crew is combat ready at the exact moment the launch order arrives, clear, fast, and decisive after 89 days of this. Every design decision in that hull points at that single operational requirement. That bread smell from the early patrol, the one that fades somewhere around week 6, is not a side effect of feeding sailors. It is a precision instrument. It is the Navy maintaining the psychological readiness of a weapons crew in the dark, at depth, beyond the reach of anyone on the surface. Which opens the next question. If keeping 135 people alive and functional for 90 days requires this much invisible engineering, what does the launch system itself require? The missiles on a ballistic missile submarine are not simply stored. They are maintained, monitored, and held at exact readiness across the full length of every patrol, inside a compartment most people have walked past on documentary footage without registering what they were actually looking at. The engineering of that compartment, and what it takes to keep a nuclear weapon in launch-ready condition after 89 days underwater is a completely different category of hidden system. And it starts with something most people have never thought to ask about: the temperature of the tube.